If I asked you to get a piece of paper and something to write with, and to make a numerical list of all the things that you would be willing to die for, how long is your list?
About 48.
Willing to die for.
About 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
About
The
48.
tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social.
Willing to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You would be willing
I'm
to
talking
die
about
for.
tribal self.
About 48.
I'm talking about those movies, those yet unheard.
All right, I put in the chat for those of y'all that want a copy, and I would suggest everyone gets a copy of the document I will be sharing, that you make sure to shoot your email. So let me go ahead and share my screen just a second here. All right, now before I get started, it's gonna be we're gonna dig a little deep in a lot of I got a lot of stuff to go through. I will periodically stop and allow us to have some questions and answers, but a good portion is just gonna be me going over some material here. All right, let me share my screen. All right, can I get confirmation y'all can see the screen?
Yes.
We can see.
All right, expand this here. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the development of solution-based approaches. Now, what's important about this before I even get jumping in is this is coming from the standpoint of, and you're going to hear me say this constantly throughout the class, dealing with non-fruitful progress versus fruitful progress, as well as critical thinking and critical consciousness. A lot of what we're going to dive into has to do with the mindset, the proper mindset of what it's going to take for us to be able to be in the right framework to deal with confrontation, to deal with oppression, to deal with advancement, to deal with leadership. This is a public class, so we're not getting into specific strategies. But the point being, the information that we're sharing with the public has to do with the proper mindset, which allows you to be visionary and allows you to have the right headspace to be able to recognize the difference between a problem and a solution, and equip you with the proper logical tools to be able to form a solution, especially as it applies to collective solution building. So let's start by setting the framework to reach a distinction between providing answers and developing solutions, because we must always be able to confirm our definition of foundation. And that's the key here, because we continue to operate under other people's definition. So that has to be a foundation. Keep also in mind of the word foundation and throughout the discussion where that applies. Without a proper baseline to reference, synchronous thought is compromised, leading to a route back to unaddressed failures, and recrossing bridges we already know will lead to disasters and non-fruitful progress. So now by non-fruitful progress, we mean events that yield on-the-spot progress or on-the-spot actions or victories, but don't sprout further development or build from the initial event. Oftentimes, the methods used by activists operate within this model. And that's part of our issue. We see things happening in a certain fashion, but there's no connecting of the dots. There's no synchronization. There's no ultimate plan or intention in terms of how we go about something. So we must go into all endeavors with a mindset for developing strategic planning, And that's really the core of what we're talking about here. Because we have not been aware of continuity in battlefield conductivity, our inability to engage knowledge from seeing proper utilization of toys has impaired our understanding of combative science and the mental applications needed to make visible the forms in which attacks are deployed against us. So let me break down two concepts here. We talk about battlefield conductivity. When we get into strategy, we're going to talk about the word conduction, and that's going to be able to open up some real powerful Jews in terms of the way we should be thinking. Also, utilization of toys. Toys is an acronym for tools of your surroundings. And when we talk about tools of your surroundings, we're basically in the recognition that if things are not being used for your benefit within your sphere and your scope, then they're going to be used against you. So as combatants, we must be able to identify tools of our surroundings. We must recognize the terrain we operate from. We must recognize all of the resources available to us. And so that's an acronym we use within the Panther movement, is toys. All right, so today we will build on the hidden jewels intentionally not taught to the masses because they don't fit the narrative to build a working class of people meant to stabilize the consumption base for elite exploitative harvesting. And see, that's important because, again, the key underlying aspect here is intentionally not taught. Everything we do has to be based on intention, and we're going to keep hitting on that today. Dealing with the 48 laws of power. And for those of y'all not familiar with it, it is attached to part of the document I will be sending you. Basically, just a brief of each one of the 48 laws. So again, if you want a copy of this document, and I suggest everyone should get it because that's the whole point, make sure your email is in the chat. 48 law of power, law number 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you. To maintain your independence, you must always be needed and wanted. The more you are relied on, the more freedom you have. Make people depend on you for their happiness and prosperity, and you have nothing to fear. Never teach them enough so that they cannot do without you, which goes into global mass domestication. And this is important, people, because this is why we continue to face the type of practices and seeing the type of oppressive conditions that are going on, because we don't seem to recognize the difference between being self-sufficient, codependent, and dependent. Now, triad of control operates through a trifactor of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. The first step of thesis is to create the problem. We're talking about those that are in power or those that want to exploit a population or a people. The second step, the antithesis, is to generate opposition to that problem, which is fear, panic, hysteria, and chaos through the masses. So first they introduce the problem, and then they drum up, especially through media and social media, they drum up the fear factors surrounding the problem, which gets everybody looking for step number 3, a synthesis, which is to offer the solution to the problem created in step 1. The issue here is most of us are unaware that the ones bringing a solution to the table were the ones that created the problem, so that they have a mass population, again, to exploit based upon providing you a solution. This is repeated all day long in the pharmaceutical industry. This process would be impossible to impose on a people without the proper psychological condition achieved in stages 1 and 2. So again, we're talking about methods of deployment that is used against us. And because if we're not being critical thinkers in terms of how we operate, we keep continually fall for these situations. This takes us to what we refer to in the Panther Party as bipolar injunctions of a victim, aka being in survival mode. The first aspect of that is denial. Before we learn to internalize who we are, address problems, and not just coping with the symptoms, we must first be willing to admit, which is self-reflection, on our own failures and call out dysfunctional patterns. And the key here is not just dysfunction, but dysfunctional patterns, because we have to be realizing that there are patterns, and these patterns have to do with our ability to have awareness. This is not done to place blame, but in fact to allow us to move beyond blame as excuse to not perform the necessary internal work needed to form the proper process of personal and collective repair. It requires personal accountability, and we're going to dive into the word accountability. And often victimizations cause ones to look outward for a scapegoat. This denial of reflective inner awareness can be the result of post-traumatic slave disorder, unprocessed psychological pain, or even epigenetic triggered traits. Denial can also apply to a society that operates from the luxury of entitlement and not realizing the freedoms it has gained may be a result of stripping other people from their freedoms. The exchange of freedoms for rights through legislation happens in the shadows. Again, we don't seem to realize what we're doing, and a lot of us are operating in denial. To the Panther, infrastructure is the apex of a solution. Let me say that again. Infrastructure is the apex of solution, and denial is the bedrock of enslavement. So we continue to put ourselves in that situation. The next component of that we find as it applies to survival mode is what we refer to as coping, which coping operates through utilizing the tools of what we call as an acronym GLUES. And it's a powerful acronym, people, and it's something that y'all should definitely put in your repertoire, because when you think about GLUES, you think about what holds things together. When I'm in survival mode, what is it that holds me together? What is it that keeps me enduring the condition of being in survival mode? Because this goes into the concept of psychology as it applies to social psychology. The acronym for GLUES is guessing, luck, understanding, emotional charging, and survival. Let me break that down. A lot of times we're guessing our way through life. When something good may happen, we say we lucky because we don't see how intention creates scenarios. We continually operate through the position of understanding as opposed to understanding and overstanding. A quick breakdown of that. Understanding would be the ability to drive a vehicle. Understanding would be the ability to repair the vehicle. Overstanding would be the ability to create a vehicle yourself for the means of transportation. Society is only going to teach us how to understand because it is the labor force, it is the consumption masses of people that need to know how to understand in order to know how to be exploited. So oftentimes our education is built around understanding. And a lot of times when we make our decisions, we're operating through emotional charging. And then again, we're stuck in this cycle of survival. So coping has to do with basically gluing things together or holding them down just so you can get by day, which operates as a conditional workarounds over self-repair into empowerment functionality is internally ready to be addressed. Coping tends to be the natural process of what we call tactical in-time moment processing, which is too often in exchange for a solution-based approach. Let me break down a little bit of what in-time moment processing is, tactical in-time moment processing. That means that I go about my day without any true purpose. Things happen, and right there on the spot, I address it, I deal with it, I navigate it, and I keep it moving. That's what coping is. Think of an obstacle course. You learn how to jump over something, move around something, climb something, duck under it, and you basically build your life in survival mode about how fast can you get around this obstacle. But because we continue to live our life in a coping scenario, what happens is, because we're coping, we just become better better at running the obstacle course. So we get faster at it. So when we get faster at this, we tend to think that oppression is not really affecting me because I know how to navigate it better. I know how to not let it get the best of me. So we cope.
Basically conditioned yourself for the obstacle course.
Exactly. We're just dealing with conditioning as survival. If you take a step back through critical analysis and scientific thinking, and you remove the obstacles, then you no longer have to deal with that, and the people behind you, the next generation, will not have to face these same obstacles that constantly can continue to get thrown out over and over on the battlefield. And so when we operate through survival, we mistake solutions for answers. And that's very important, people, because when we talk about having the proper mindset to tackle and take on oppressive conditions, if you are dealing with things as it applies to the symptoms, you are simply addressing the coping mechanism. And as long as you're doing that, what you're doing at that point is dealing with what we call non-fruitful progress.
Can you say that again? You said about the solutions and the answers part.
We tend to basically exchange solutions for answers, and we're going to dive into the difference between solutions and answers.
Gotcha.
The deal is an answer simply provides you something to work with, or you think it's giving you a solution, but an answer and a solution are not interchangeable. We tend to do that, and that's our biggest issue. And that's again because we operate through survival.
Fix.
Yeah, a quick fix. Exactly. But what it is a suppression of symptoms. By suppressing the symptoms, this is why I brought up the medical industry, pharmaceutical industry. By oppressing symptoms, we tend to think we're cured because we don't directly feel the effects of the underlying problem. But just because you don't feel it, don't mean it ain't there. Which means you're still going to die from this problem. It's just not in your direct consciousness. It's hitting you internally and you don't feel it because you've been numbed to the actual problem. See, we keep living our lives through sedation. This is one of the biggest issues of why entertainers get paid so much, because they help nullify and numb us to address the actual problems that we need to deal with. We find escapes, and these escapes causes us to have a coping mechanism as opposed to a solution-based report. So next, let's cover scientific thought. A hierarchy of the scientific thought must be established between the trifecta of physics, ethics, and politics. This takes us to the concept of social physics. To reach the root of the problem, you must dig in the dirt, which bonds the relationship between social statics, which is existing social structures, and social dynamics, which is social change. These form the intersectional bridging of morality and laws for social life. We're talking about social engineering, people. The process of speculation precedes the process of operation, which is why it's important to be in touch with your emotional body. Thus, the speculative nature of perception shapes our philosophy, culture, practice, and forms the mind and our mentality as a basis of all assumptions, hypotheses, and beliefs about reality and living. In other words, you begin to operate through a fairy tale land or a fairy tale dream or a false reality based upon how you're manipulated through social statics and social dynamics. Now, for the sake of strategic countermeasures, we must discuss the relationship between, earlier, like I said, strategy, conduction, and tactics. We have to go into this because too often, most people are taught strategy and tactics. But The missing component is conduction. Now, what we're showing you here is just a brief diagram that was used by the Boeing company, and as it applies to the Raptor, which is a drone. And you notice how in the backdrop is showing you that that drone released dozens of small drones. And this goes into the trifecta because dynamic systems, balance scorecarding, and skill facilitation brings you to a level of operational strategic mapping. Again, scientific thinking, which helps you to think in things in terms of how scenarios operate and what can happen through these scenarios. So strategy, let's break them down, involves the planning of an operation, which includes gathering information of subject matter that is essential to conducting the mission, the makeup of personnel that would be required to perform the operation, resources and updates on current events surrounding the organizational involvement with the mission, available generative funding and resource opportunities needed to conduct the mission. That's important, people, because notice it says generative funding. Oftentimes when we think about money, we don't think about it through the process of generative funding. And it is generative funding that is what creates millionaires and billionaires, which completely separates the class from the rest of us, which is how you got the working class and the non-working class, because they are tapped into generative funding. Next one would be the liaison between organizational streams that may be involved with the mission, the power to grant delegation operatives needed to accomplish the workload on an as needed or a need to know basis, the general knowledge of mobilization and actions as it relates to the mission, and communication with the leading field officers over deployment and operation. The missing component that we have to address, the elephant in the room, is conduction. Conduction involves the transference of theory to practice by way of mechanism conduction, which is relying on vision of strategy into transferable, fruitful processing workflows. Let me say that last part again. Strategy into transferable, fruitful processing workflows, which is continually where we drop the ball because we're not taught how to bear fruit through processing. The conduction only works if the entire body is able to cycle the power transmission from the source to the organs and back to the source again. That is circulation. That is why the word currency is used the way it is, because it's mimicking life bodies, is mimicking cell theory and cell structure. When we talk about currency and economics, it's all the same. The organs are trained on the processes of critical consciousness, application, and projective thinking, and therefore must absorb the method of seeding the tactical processing. So notice that they have to seed the tactical processing. This is why conduction is what it is. The method requires self-learning, will to achieve. This willpower can not be taught, but must reside within unobstructed from blockage. The strategic future cell clustering is fashioned over time through each mission as a connection, something not achievable without conductivity. That is the key factor here, because when you talk about strategy and tactics, you are still able to get a lot done, but without conduction, there's going to be a very vast, strong component that is not going to be able to get passed on, which is why you end up with just in time moment processing and not being able to attach things and create synchronization in thought and action. The next one here, the tactical callus, is converted through the experiences of failure victories. What basically that means is we always supposed to learn from every mistake and everything that is happening. Sit back and realize, what is it that I should have learned from this? Always be critical. Always be willing to cross-examine everything. As the proper transference folds, the efficiency of the trifactor will live in harmonious equilibrium, which takes us to the concept of executive, legislative, and judicial operation. which again is that trifactor approach. And see, we continue to get turned off on the concept of politics because we don't recognize the component of self-governance. We don't recognize the component of self-sufficiency because we're not taught to see it that way. Now, tactics involve the carrying out of the mission with the objective of successful results, which include learning the navigation of terrain operation, learning and instructing of equipment needed to perform the mission, applying functions, the salute program, which is size, activity, location, unit, time, and equipment, which helps you to have a holistic approach to everything that's going on the battlefield, adapting to the actual conditions needed in the field to make the plans become deployable, action-ready strikes. Power to delegate responsibility to personnel with allegiance of orders being carried out. Liaisons between field representatives of other organizational streams involved. And then we got access to funds and resources necessary for performing the mission. Then operational practices when needed to create cohesiveness in the field between connecting actions of engagement. Notice how it says connecting actions of engagement, not isolated engagements, but everything was intentional and there is a connection. There is a reason for it. Last one being a constant channel of communication between officers in command prior to the battlefield. So you don't wait till you get there and then start trying to figure this stuff out. Now, to round this off, the breakdown of the three will continue to expand upon each floor of power. So when we talk about floors of power, we talk about how we deal with what we call foundational generational advancement, which means that everything that was previous and before you was created a level of power, and now there would be another construct added on top of that one and another one added on top of that one. Part of our biggest issue is we continue to go right back to the foundation and rebuild it again. We constantly stuck at 101 because we are not passing on the proper knowledge, the proper tools, and the proper understanding and overstanding of how to construct fighting against oppression. So we don't seem to be building floors of power. We continue to be being reactionary. This process provides a format that serves as an overview of the inheritance of trifactor eco relationships. That's the whole point, is we have to think in terms of eco relationships. Everything is interconnected, everything. And when we don't have the consciousness to recognize this, all we can do is be reactionary, which takes us to survival mode. Now, before I even go into the next part, let me see here. Do I have any questions real quick? Just raise your hand or jump in. Any questions or comments about what we talked about so far? Let me get someone to acknowledge y'all still with me.
Still here. I'm good to go.
Okay. All right. I hope this is sinking in. All right. Let's jump into the next part. So what about answers? To draw a separation on having an answer revolves around a reference point of before and after the perceived condition of a problem. As a footnote, for a deeper understanding, read a book called The Science of Science and the Science in Sciences by African Creation Energy. For example, the problem of police brutality tends to be challenged from the position of going after the officers or bring attention to the department. But this approach is tied directly to the point of after the condition and the personality of emulation. While this does provide an answer, it does not provide a solution. The focal point leads to the person taking the blame and bearing the responsibility. An immediate victory, but not fruitful progression. Let's explain that. The hypothesis of a solution. A solution requires more than a responsibility. It requires accountability. The difference between faulting a responsible party and holding the position of accountability is one warrants punishment for an event that occurred, which is a reaction. The other holds a change in the conditions that make a reoccurrence improbable by removing the conductive generator action. Mind you, this here is a jewel that's being dropped, because what we're saying here is by removing the conductive generator, which in other words, when we talked about strategy, if you take out conduction and you only have strategy and tactics, you are removing the conductive generator, which means there is not going to be a proper transference of the vision to the actual field component of action that is taking place. There may be an emulation, but there's not going to be an actual proper transference, meaning that you're not going to be able to deal with stackable elements of power, which takes us to synchronized kinetic action. So by taking out the conductor, strategic power can't be properly coupled with a foundational tactical system, aka institution management. See, we're talking about building something, so we're dealing with institutions. Take into account the standard definition for the words problem and solution. The resolve of a problem, to respond to satisfactory, to meet successively by way of explanation, argument, or justification. The resolute of a solution, the act of solving or the state of being solved, the disentanglement of any intricate problem or difficult question, explanation, clearing up, use specific, especially in mathematics, either of the process of solving an equation or problem or the result of a process. Using the example of testing for knowledge of a subject, if one test is multiple choice, which is picking the best option, and the other test requires you to solve the equation, it is possible to get the right answer through deductive reasoning with multiple choice, but not any closer to knowing how to actually solve a problem, which we refer to as picking from options. So let me break that down real quick again. When you're taking a test and one is a multiple choice test, the other one requires you to literally write out what the problem is. I can guess, I can glues, I can use my glues and guess how to get the right answer through deductive reasoning. Mind you, remember that. So I can do that through deductive reasoning. But if you were to just flat out ask me what the answer is, there's no way I can provide you with the answer if I don't have the answer right in front of me, if I don't truly know it, which is why multiple choice is not going to teach you. Oftentimes in our school system, what we find, unfortunately, that students are taught, especially public school systems, students are taught how to take a test to pass the test simply by the reoccurring of memorization of the right answer, not solution. Y'all have to pick up on what I'm saying. They are taught the right answer. They are not taught solution-based approaches. They're taught how to get the right answer. Therefore, throughout society, as we get older, as we start developing, that element of critical consciousness, the element of critical thinking is left out. It is not maturing right along with our aging. And because of this, what tends to happen is we approach life through option-based realities, which option-based realities takes us away from choice. And by being pulled away from choice, you are giving away your power.
It sounds like Elections.
Exactly. Especially because we are not the ones in charge. We're going to dive into that here in just a minute. Now, because social statics does not require innovation or consciousness of a source and obey existing social structure, it is possible to use this route to sleep a population into mobilization around the effect and separate this effect from the true cause, which requires social dynamics in order to transform social change. This is weaponization of providing answers. Going back to what I stated earlier, the weaponization of providing answers. This method of attacking is currently plaguing society by sleeping the population with instant accessibility, causing personal acute logical awareness to remove the sourcing, which causes truth and facts to be marginalized under a wave of informational overload. This is why social media tends to be so powerful, because we get inundated with a whole lot of data, a whole lot of options, a whole lot of routes that are directly linked to our emotional state and a chemical high. All of these things tend to tie you into reactionary mode of positioning. So therefore, you seek answers. This is why we asked our phone, hey, what's such and such? Or how do you get this? We get an answer right away. Getting an answer right away removes the concept of critical scientific thinking and analysis, because you cannot challenge that autonomous AI voice and engage in debate. So there's no going back and forth and proving a point. So then what we do is we move forward with that answer and make that answer embody, and we embody that answer. By embodying that answer gets exchanged for a solution. By getting exchanged for a solution, we are now taken out of non-linear sequential thinking, which causes us to not know how to be revolutionary, not know how to be self-sufficient, not know how to be self-determined, not know how to be collectively organized. I hope this is making sense to y'all. Anybody got any questions or comments in regards to what I've just stated? Because we're dropping some jewels. It's super important that we pick up on this.
Yeah, it's deep. It's deep.
Doc, go ahead. Hit me up.
Absolutely. No, so I'm thinking about, and it's a combination of the things of things you've discussed, but this point of choices versus actually going and finding a solution, right? And the point that very much mirrors sort of the way that we're taught that we can engage with politics to try to improve our situation, which is elections, right? But then that also goes into that point that we mentioned earlier, that right, like the first step is right, we have to recognize we have a problem, right? We have to properly identify the problem, right? So what I've noticed, and I think you're definitely driving at it, but I just kind of wanted to put it in a different way and underscore it and kind of think about it, is when you talk to liberals, I'll just say it, right? A lot of the time what they're going to say is they're going to if you start to hit them with like, hey, this is the systemic problem, voting for XYZ person is not going to fix this, they immediately come to, well, what's your solution then? Well, what's your solution then, right? And the issue is, right, like, back to that point, right, that they want to reverse the order of operations, right? So they want you to provide a solution before they'll recognize that there's a problem. And if you're, and that's obviously very difficult to do, because the solutions that we, propose are very complicated, take a very long time to explain, and require everybody to be on board with the fact that there is in fact a problem, right? So it becomes a very self-defeating cycle. So I guess I just kind of wanted to tie it together and bring that point up, that it becomes very difficult because, again, because people want hear your solution before they'll acknowledge that the problem exists, or acknowledge that we should be working to solve the problem, right? But yeah.
Or they
Yeah,
could
just
just be trying to say that you're just try to poke a bunch of holes into your solution, so that way, you sitting back there and stuck, and you're back at the point to where you stop thinking about creating a solution, and then you just start focusing on answers because it's something quick and it's not as thought out, and it um just kind of numbs the pain for a short period of time.
I think what we have to recognize, especially when you're dealing with I would say blockheads. Let's just call it that, because now we're talking about denial. That's why we covered denial when we talked about bipolar injunctions of a victim. Remember, we're talking about a victim. Okay, the person is not recognizing that they have to first see themselves as a person of power. If I see myself as a victim, I'm going to operate through denial. If I operate through denial, my best defense is putting a hole in you addressing the real problem, or the root problem, should we say. So therefore, as long as I can present symptoms, because keep in mind, symptoms are victories that I can immediately draw into. And when you're dealing with the masses of the people, or you're dealing with people that are in pain, the reason why the pharmaceutical industry is so powerful and it's so easy to exploit us is because by addressing those immediate symptoms, what happens is it allows me to now move away from really even thinking about what the problem may be, because I tend to tie symptoms into the immediate surrounding sensory input. So when we talk about the difference between consciousness and the difference between sight, see, if I operate through sight, I operate through my emotions. I need to reach out and touch it. I need to say, hey, I have to grab hold of something and place blame. That's why we talked about the difference between responsibility and accountability. Responsibility allows me to move into at least drawing a closure on something. And as long as I can draw a closure on something, as long as I can give it a concrete way of not even really addressing it, but just being able to place blame on something and say this is it, then I feel at ease. And by feeling at ease, I can move on and then address the next symptom. So when you're talking about dealing with people that are completely tied and bought into a political system that is inherently not the correct answer, everything that I'm going to do is going to be based upon operating within those parameters. So now I have to rationalize why I must stick within that framework of operation. And by you coming with a solution that is removed from the framework, or removed from this game, this board game, I'm not willing to accept that. You're basically saying don't play the game. You're basically saying playing the game of Monopoly is bad for you. And I'm doing so well at rolling them dice, collecting $200 every time I go across go, which again is why we talked about coping. Remember, you got denial, and denial leads you into coping. I'm good at that obstacle course. I can roll at that double six. I can make these chess moves. So by me doing that, I want you to pick me as your leader, because I'm going to show you how it's done. I'm going to represent you. I'm going to get you to the next round. But the whole point of that is I am playing the game of Monopoly. I will not win. There are nothing but losers and a winner, because it's about exploitation. It's about grabbing up all of the properties and making everybody pay as they move across their board. But yet, as long as I got you playing that rat race, you're stuck. And if somebody comes along and says don't play Monopoly, I have to justify how stupid and out of sync and crazy they are, and that becomes my target. So let me move on. Now let's talk about a case study, because this goes right back to what getting into some of the stuff Doc was touching on. Case study on solution-based approaches by way of political warfare waged against the people. And this is important because we're gonna look at this one and we're gonna see it from the position of a operation that is intentional about how it is designing and playing warfare and manipulating. Project 2025 is an initiative launched by the American political organization known as the Heritage Foundation. I want to hip you to the importance of wordplay and the power of what we're seeing, because a lot of people again are missing what's right before their eyes. And I say that because remember, we talked about foundational generational advancement. We keep talking about having a proper foundation. We keep talking about being able to pass the baton, being able to collectively get the people to operate. What is a heritage, people? And what is a foundation? The organization itself refers to and calls itself Heritage Foundation. That in itself is spell casting a very powerful statement. Now, it began to openly promote its agenda in 2022. Its primary goal was to develop a comprehensive plan for the future of the United States, focusing on public policy and governance. Governance, people. The project aims to guide the direction of conservative policymaking, leadership, and use the preparation for the 2024 elections as a springboard to implement the actions. The projected goals of Project 2025 include policy development, formulating detailed policies across various areas such as healthcare, education, national security, and the economy that aligns with foundation. Notice how we're saying there, align with foundation conservative principles. Foundation again. Number 2, staffing and leadership. Preparing a pipeline. You hear me? These are powerful words here. Preparing a pipeline of qualified personnel for government roles who are committed to implementing the project's policies. Implementation. Everything that we're talking about is intentional, people, not reactionary. Research and analysis. Conducting, what did we talk about concept of conduction? Conducting extensive research to inform policy recommendations and bolster conservative arguments in public debates. Bashing and going at you and hitting you hard. Number 4, voter engagement. Mobilizing conservative voters by articulating a clear and compelling vision for the nation's future and overshadowing all other candidates by way of operating through a clear planned strategy with intentional goals inclusive of long-term projections that cover social foundational engineering. We have to see the power that's being displayed, the intentional power. Number 5, restoration of institutions. What did we say earlier about institutions? Promoting aggressive revolutionary reforms aimed at redefining the architectural landscape of restoration and rewriting historical legacy. Rebranding trust and efficiency in governmental institutions. Again, institutions by way of economic domination and polarization. What continues to happen through the people, with the people? Thrown into polarization and chaos. The long-term outlining of institutional, infrastructural, architectural power as defined elements migrate a path of personnel in leadership position development to handle the resource acquisition of all areas of interest, domestic and foreign. We are talking about how power recognizes how to generate and create power. Remember when we talked earlier on strategy, we talked about economically being able to be generative in terms of your wealth. This is why Trump came straight into office talking about we need to take Greenland. Straight into office talking about the only way Ukraine is going to get our support is if we take some of their resources. Straight into office talking about, well, you know what? We need to take back South America and we need to allow South Americans, white South Americans, Africans to come into the United States and reclaim that. We need to turn around and turn Gaza into a resort. He is talking about acquisition. These are direct power-based moves. Comrade Coyote, go ahead and jump in.
Hey, I'll power to the people, comrades. I just wanted to drop something real quick that I think is pertinent. I'm going to assume that most people on here are not on the conservative side of the spectrum, but maybe a few of you, or a few of us, we can say, have more liberal tendencies. And I wanted to want to take this opportunity to demonstrate the difference in effectiveness of political strategies. The Republican Party and the conservative political hegemony as a whole does have a clear vision. First and foremost, what we need to understand about liberalism is first and foremost applied to your opinions on economics. It is a laissez-faire approach to interacting with the economic system in place, that which being capitalism, minimal interference. So we see that at a level being in line with the conservative agenda. However, when it comes to ideological systems, they flounder consistently. They don't really know where they're going. They bounce from place to place, and they lack this foundational generational advancement that, while be it heinous and distasteful, conservatives do have. And so one of the things that we can see happen in history across Germany, across France, across Italy, and in Japan is that liberalism is the first thing that gets deployed. And some of you might scoff at the first part of this, but liberalism is the first thing that gets deployed against fascism, typically in the political theater, and it always fails. It is always inefficient because it lacks an equal opposite. And the two are so closely related that the arguments that they have don't really stand. So when we're talking about these kind of ideas and we're building some of these structures using the methods that Chairman Moore has elaborated to us tonight, we have to create an equal opposition to this in magnitude, in scope, and in ideology, which is in constant conversation with material reality. It's how we define how the material world should be interacted with. So I just wanted to drop that in real quick. Hopefully it's not too tangential, but if it was any sign for you to abandon Democrats, hopefully you took it.
Thank you, Chairman Coyote. And keep in mind, people, we're not here to hold any punches. We need us to get outside of our emotional comfort zone and realize that we are at battle. We are engaged in a war. So we want to give it to you raw and uncut. So in closing on that point about Project 2025, overall Project 2025 is a multi-stage structured blueprint for elite power management and leadership aimed at maximizing the seeding of foundational advancement and innovative world domination control through the might of U.S. policy for a specific class and group of individuals held on top through channeled layers of perpetual self-interest, safekeeping gatekeepers that specialize in banking, real estate, legal affairs, arms supplies, and technology. All of that is at the table, and all of that is at play and in operation in what's being done. Now let's dive into more analysis of how we need to think in order to combat our issues. Critical thinking must elevate to critical consciousness. Part of the problem with that is, again, the way we are taught to think is not even critical thinking, to be critical thinkers as adults. But we have to get to the point of critical consciousness. So a brief chart detailing critical thinking versus creative strategy, which helps to elevate you to the next level. Critical thinking gets you to think about the why and the what. Creative strategy and critical consciousness makes you think about the how, to give you a simple, super basic point of reference. Oftentimes when people talk about historical, powerful things, or just say we can talk about the wonders of the world, like the Pyramid of Giza. People talk all the time about how powerful and complex the structure of Giza is, and they go into the mathematical geometric equations of it. So they talk about the why and the what, but you don't hear too many people dive into the how. How was it built? How did they figure this out? How was the alignment done on the geometric grids of the Earth platonics, as well as how did it align with the solar systems? We don't talk about that. Why? Because now you're talking about critical consciousness. Now you're talking about being intact with a holistic approach of eco-economics and ecosystems and eco-recognition. Having a holistic being approach to how life is operating. And critical consciousness will take you there. And we have to get to that point. So we have to change the way we take in information. We have to change the way we dissect things, the way we approach things. That's why it's not about answers, people. It's about solutions. A method that will help you recognize this in terms of your consciousness is knowing convergence and divergence. Convergence brings together merging all parts in order to determine a collective whole, where divergence is the act of separating, isolating, and taking apart. Now, those that are in power utilize this polarity as a way of manipulating the people in the population, because so many of us have no idea of the intricacy of the psychology of how humans think, operate, and move and become what they are, especially through the adaptation of age. So when you're dealing with convergent thinking, you're taking in facts, constantly centered around facts, and divergence is pushing you out toward ideas, which are easily attached to emotions. So if I want to manipulate a population, I get you to divide yourselves. I get you to work against yourselves, and I get you to get all caught up in your feelings and how you want to be identified. Convergence is living through the collective, whereas divergence is survival through the individual. The educational goal of critical consciousness in the creation of democratic society is the intergenerational equity between students and teachers, in which both learn, both question, both reflect, and both participate in meaning making. Meaning making. It is important to note the meaning definition process as shared, for this holds all involved accountable. Not responsible, accountable. Common traits of a good problem solver. Problem solvers know what the problem is, as opposed to us again talking about symptoms. Be able to identify specific and potential roadblocks and separate them from symptoms. Number two, problem solvers know when to apply simple or complex solutions. Going back to what Doc talked about, alluded on earlier, problems can come with all levels of complications. A good problem solvers know when to apply systematic and complex solutions to an issue, or when to make use of shortcuts and find easier routes to solutions through successful building. It's still intentional, people. It's all intentional. This also takes into account generational building and the current limitations of the collective due to the lack of resource building, which is not the same as currency, which is why we have to refer to strategic alliance with generative economics, which is why we talked about that within strategy. If your strategy is not generative, then it's not a strategy, people. And we have to know when we're defining the difference between strategy and tactics, because too often people are exchanging one for another and calling something a strategy when indeed it's really a tactic. And so we have to recognize that. All the while, the concept of conductivity is never even mentioned. So right off the bat, by simply engaging in strategy and tactics without having a conductive operative path, you are losing. Period. 3, problem solvers view problems as opportunities to grow. Those with solution-based thinking often view problems as situations that will help them learn to improve upon their existing expertise. This holds the wisdom of being a lifelong progressive, fruitful learner. There's that word fruitful again. As opposed to learning lessons the hard way through unwarranted trauma and reactionary behavior. Again, I urge everybody to get a copy of this document. So make sure your email is in the chat, and you can send it to just me directly if you don't want other people to see email. Number 4, problem solvers think outside the box. The act of troubleshooting causes the mind to devolve between what is most obvious. True problem solvers are open to new ways of thinking and exploration towards solutions. You must know the difference between choice and option. We talked about that earlier. This dives us to 48 Laws of Power, law number 31. Control the options. Get others to play with the cards you deal. This is why we talked about the game of Monopoly. The best deceptions are the ones that seem to give the other person a choice. Your victims feel that they are in control, but actually your puppets. Give people options that come out in your favor, whichever one they choose. Force them to make choices between the lesser of two evils. That's what we talked about earlier with the politics, both of which serves your purpose. Put them on the horns of a dilemma. They will gorge wherever they turn. And see, that's the power of this. When you know exactly what you are doing. This is why we talk about the population being domesticated. Number 5, problem solvers do not feel that they are always right. Individuals who are focused on finding the right solution are more concerned with what is best for the present circumstance, while being unattached to feeling and therefore capable of motion that is not drawing energy from proving themselves right or someone else wrong, for that matter. Because again, often a strategy when someone wants to oppose rational logic is to start attacking, because they have to be right. They're not open to learning. It's all about being right or proving you wrong. And proving you wrong don't make me right. Remember that as a concept of debating. To prove you wrong doesn't mean that I'm right. Refer to strategy offered by the Democratic Party that was reactionary in design, because the only real plan is to stop the other team from winning instead of offering sustainable solutions to government policy failures that meet the people's expectations or demands. This goes back to what Chairman Coyote said. There was not a plan except stop them from winning. Number 6, problem solvers have well-developed adult social skills. You see, because oftentimes through being traumatized, we are not operating through adult social skills. We're operating still through childhood social skills and childish social skills. This is why we talked about dysfunction, dysfunctional patterns. Because if I haven't identified that dysfunctional pattern of how I think and how I operate, how I move, then I'm not dealing with adult social skills. I'm still dealing with child social skills that have followed me into my adult life. And a lot of times we're not willing to self-reflect and take ourselves outside of these things that have impaired us throughout our life. This is why we talked about that and why you have to draw witness to that. Know the importance of connecting well with people and forming significance, both in person and online. This trait also helps them build solutions through visionary charting. Visionary charting. We must be willing to meet the people where they where they are, and bring them to the right reasoning. Right reasoning. We got to bring them into right reasoning. Bridge scientific analysis and divulge the difference between linear and non-linear thinking. And there's additional documentation that will be provided that dives into the difference between linear and non-linear thinking. Number 7, problem solvers will rather prevent than intervene. Solution-based thinkers know that the best way to be more productive in an organization is to prevent problems from developing in the first place. They are therefore quite centered on quality and due diligence. We must always work to stay ahead and not allow our movements to be the result of constant avoidable reactions as much as possible. Number 8, problem solvers explore all paths. You must not rely on single event-based solutions to a problem. Remember that, because that is how it is detached and not coupled with the next generation or the next action or centricity, which is what it takes to create collective operation. As troubleshooters are always ready with a backup plan or a new angle of entry toward handling the issue. Most end user problems are built ups of multiple problems affecting individuals, family, and community, which is another trifactor we have to recognize when we talk about holistic approaches. The individual, the family, and the community all at once. Too often we're taught, remember this, we're taught that what's important is, as an individual, I get good schooling, get a good education, so I can get a good job. I get a good job so I can form a family. I form a family so they can go off and be happy individuals and buy nice cars, buy a nice house, and then they start a family. And then that family starts another family, raises individuals. But what you constantly seeing happening is the repetitive process of this polarity between individual and family. What about community? Why is community an option? Why, when we raise our children and we raise our families, do we consider community operating and community work optional? You see, again, strategy, conduction, and tactics. When you remove one of these elements, when you remove something from that trinity, you can still kind of sort of feel like you're on the right path. Again, feel like you're on the right path and that you're doing something progressive. But missing one of those components will completely separate you from being anywhere near the same level of operational power that the elite have as a position of thinking. And so this is the crown jewel that we're talking about, people. Our approach must be holistic. We have to be inclusive of all dynamics. We almost done. We don't have a whole lot more to go, so y'all just work with me. Number 9, problem solvers have reasonable expectations in specific situations. Overstand, not understand, but overstand that several issues can often have a hand in one problem, requiring patience when it comes to isolating the issues at play. For this reason, be aware that each problem should be approached with realistic expectations, and the identity must involve patterns, cross patterns, recognition, and historical analysis when feasible. Number 10, problem solvers do not create more problems for other people. The goal of a true problem solver is to discover solutions that will not harm or overly inconvenience others, which is a tough road to be on depending on where we are. That's why I said we have to be careful about blockheads. We must avoid an action which may adversely affect other comrades. The solution will be temporary and actions will be taken to reduce negative consequences for the rest of the group. Do not scapegoat or form crucifixion rallies as a means of solution/answer exchange, which is what we talked about earlier. Because oftentimes when we think about seeking justice, should I say, that's when we go into crucifixion rally. We got to make somebody see blood. We got to make sure somebody is held responsible. We're not dealing with accountability. We're simply dealing with responsible parties. Therefore, it is easy to think that scapegoating and crucifixions are actual solutions. But in fact, that's just part of the answer. And it becomes the exchange that we're talking about. We must not be of the same cloth that created the politicians. Emulating or changing hands of the reflective power exploitation is not on the table for our liberation. We're not here to emulate them. If you operate through that position of scapegoating and crucifixion rallying, know that you're not going to get a true solution. So real quick, we're going to run through this. Basic steps of problem solving. Number one, identify the problem. This means using scientific method to evaluate what the specific problem is and what supportive systems and or harmonic repercussions. You got to deal with specific problems, supportive symptoms, and harmonic repercussions. Again, that's a trifecta. Number two, determine the criteria for your solution. Before generating a solution, you must first define what you expect to achieve. That means be intentional. Create possible solutions. Generate, we keep talking about generative, generate several possible ways to rectify the problem. Do not rely on single solutions. If the problem is complex, you may need to consult subject matter experts or perform further research on the subject's roots. This is why you can't ask Siri. Analyze each possible solution. Analyze each potential solution alongside criteria that you create. Almost done here. Number five, choose the best solution. Choose a solution that is most practical or most feasible. Always employ the local objectives and the 10-point platform. We're talking about Panther ideology now, but as it applies to the general masses, the point being, you have to have local objectives. You have to have something that you see that you actually want to achieve. Think about how people go into protest oftentimes, and there's really no objective. We're going to make a whole lot of noise. We may tear up a little shit here and there, but the bottom line is, okay, why did we gather? What is our aims? What is our objective? What are we attempting to achieve? And then you have to have a platform. This is a foundation. This is a framework in order to operate and get things done. Number six, create an implementation plan. You got to write out a plan. People, this means you have to do some writing, do some drafting, do some actual work. Have a working strategy, conduction, tactic to implement your solution. It says strategy, conduction, and tactic, not just strategy and tactic. This plan should also help track the plan's ongoing progress to build upward success. Number seven, document all information connected to your solution. Make a list of all information you require from step 1 through step 6. Attempt to keep your findings to concise ease of reference. Present your solution plan to the collective group with detailed written analysis and reporting. Explain why these are the best choices towards solutions. Be prepared to go before a murder board. A murder board is basically me realizing that I should be chopping holes in what you present to me. We have to be able to allow ourselves to be critical with one another. If I'm gonna get my feelings hurt because I present something to you, then I need to not even be at the table. Again, I'm stuck in my emotions. Number 8, establish long-term objectives and projections and live your life with objective intentionality. Everything we do or don't do is either allowing the progression of our oppression or eliminating it. There is no in between. There is no such thing as being neutral when a war is being waged against you. We are experiencing the direct action of low intensity combat here in the US, and the plot to exchange the direction and pace of fascism by way of Zionism is on course and meeting its objectives. So the question you must ask yourself, what are you going to do about the deployments of social fabric reconstruction weapons? And what steps will you take to train for individual and collective psychological combat readiness required to engage in battle. This is what we're dealing with here. Now, the document I'm going to provide is longer than what I'm showing you right now, but this initial document is 40 pages. The first thing that we went over was the actual class. The rest of the stuff here is resource information. This is a document, this comes from a webpage called Project Tracker, which actually shows you how the Project 2025, all of the agenda objectives are broken down so that you can actually see what percentages they are in terms of achieving their goals. And I definitely suggest everyone goes to this website and check it out. It breaks everything down. You get to see what the objectives are. You get to go to reference points to see how they go about getting to these objectives and so forth. So within this document, the first link is a resource that takes you right to that. We also have a resource that talks about scientific method, hierarchy of science according to Augusta, linear versus nonlinear thinking, a brief video on that. And mind you, I'm pretty sure there's more informative sources on a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. These are just some things to get you started. For linear to lateral, unleashing the power of nonlinear traditional thinking, these are some links to different Panther formations, us here in San Diego, the Washington Black Panther Party, the Panther Party, as well as the Panther 48 YouTube channel to get additional information. Also, like I stated, I did the brief, providing you with a brief of the 48 laws of power for those of y'all that's not familiar with it. Also, what's important is to have, in addition to the 48 laws of power, we always like to refer to the 33 strategies of war. So that is also included in this document. And this is just a picture here showing the evil kingdom of fascism at hand. Any quick questions before we close out? Also, real quick, the document I'm going to send y'all is actually going to have a embedded manual, mini manual that goes into critical thinking, one that also talks about scientific thinking, and also is going to have the playbook, the Project 2025 playbook, which is a 922 page document. Plus, it also has the liberals document that they created, which is supposed to be their answer to Project 2025, which highlights the attitude that they have, which is to defeat them. We just got to stop them from winning. So you got those things to draw from in terms of being able to see where we need to be in regards to our critical thinking, our critical consciousness, and developing solution-based approaches. Any closing comments or questions? Anybody? Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to underscore this point, but obviously, Comrade Ward has been talking about this idea that, like, with toys, right? Anything around you either is something that you are using to your benefit or something that's being used against you. Everything you do or don't do will either benefit you or benefit the oppressor, right? And this whole framework that we need to understand, right? That we are in a war, we are in a class war, and everything you do has a class character that it serves, right? It serves you or it serves your enemy. And there's no neutrality, right? It's important to really understand that goes for everything you think or don't think as well, right? The way that you think about the world, not just do I support the people or do I support the oppressor, but how you think about going about doing that and how you define those terms, right? So what I'm saying here is that when we think about what's been presented tonight, how important it is that we analyze things in the correct way, in the ways that lead us to the best possible solutions, the most effective solutions. We need to understand, if we're not doing that, if we're not taking, if we are not thinking about how to get out of this situation and how to liberate ourselves in the most effective and progressive and fruitful ways, then we are serving the oppressor with the way we are thinking. And again, there is no middle ground there. Either you are taking the most effective and fruitful routes possible, both in action and in thought, to defeat oppression, or you are operating in service to the oppressor.
That's the truth that we have to be willing to face, folks. It hurts, but guess what? This is revolution. Andrea, did you have something to speak on?
I'm not so much, other than, mind blown again. My mind is always blown, and I appreciate, you're sharing this information and being able to attend. And yeah, it's very radical. Thank you.
Problem. This is what the Panthers are here for. All right, everybody. Again, I will give me a day to shoot this document out. I may start doing it tonight, but if not, you will have it by tomorrow. It's all about learning and studying and growing and building. The goal of the Panthers is to raise the consciousness of the people. Let's do our thing. So with that being said, folks, thank y'all for attending the class. See you in the battlefield. All power to the people.
All power to the people. All power.
All power to the people. Thank you.